Yes. Okay. Hi. Hi everyone. You are here for a nice TESOL session entitled uh, sorry, entitled sorry, I can't see myself in the screen. Okay, again, welcome everyone to nice TESOL webinar. Today's title is translanguaging. I'm sorry, language ideology and practice in classroom reading assessment. Again, before we proceed, please, I want to remind everyone that this webinar will be recorded, and please kindly mute yourself, and we will proceed right now. Okay. So my name is Qin Lin. I'm the president-elect for New York State TESOL. I want to extend my warmest welcome to all of you and thank you for being here. We are so glad that you are able to join us today. So before we proceed, I would like to say a few words about NYS TESOL. New York State TESOL is a nonprofit organization. It has been serving the TESOL professional in the great New York area for 50 years. Yes, that's right, 50 years. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary. And throughout the pandemic, the organization rose to the challenges, provided many needed support for the community. We have members from all over the world. We are proud to say that our organization is an international scope organization. As you see in the screen, I know this is our website. The New York State organized a webinar all year round. Our objective is to keep you in step with the current trends and the emerging issue in the field. We have a nice special interest group. I'm sure you can find something that fit your interest. We recommend that you join our interest group. In the meanwhile, we have a lot of activity going on. Currently, we are running for a leadership nomination. Currently we have 4 positions that are vacant: President-elect, VP Outreach, VP Membership, and VP Conference Elect. And you can find out more information about our call for nomination on our website with all the job description. Meanwhile, we have a lot of award going on. This is our way of giving back to the community. I'm not going to go through that because it's a very, very long list. So please consider nominating yourself, nominating your colleague, nominate your student. We would like to see you being honored. Meanwhile, in addition to the webinar and other activities, we are planning our biggest event, our annual conference, which is scheduled around November 4 to 6. This year, we are planning a hybrid format, and the theme is looking forward, educational empowerment and transformative education. So this year we will have opportunity to get together in person since the pandemic brought out, and we are super excited about this opportunity. So we hope to see you there. Okay, and please follow us on the social media, on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Participants will have opportunity to receive a CTLE hour for this event, and I will put the link in the chat box later for your convenience. Okay, so now we turn to our webinars. So today's webinar is titled Language Ideologies and Practice in Classroom Reading Assessment with Dr. Laura Moreno. So let me introduce Dr. Laura Moreno.
Ching, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're still seeing the website. I didn't know if you wanted to, we're seeing the part of the NYS TESOL website right now.
Yes, yes. After I finish, I will let Dr. Moreno share her screen. Okay, so right now, I suppose you are seeing the NYS TESOL website, right?
We're seeing just part of it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. The screen is okay. But that's my intention. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. Yes. So Dr. Laura Moreno earned her PhD degree in urban education from the Graduate Center CUNY with a focus on bilingual education. She is currently associate professor at the Brooklyn College, and also a program coordinator at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. Dr. Moreno's research is focused on the literacy development of emerging bilinguals, the literacy assessment of and the development of teachers' knowledge and how this intersect with equity. She's particularly interested in investigating how to shift and reimagine monolingual literacy spaces by centering it on children's multilingual and multimodal practices. Her article, Translanguaging Responsive Assessment Adaptation, Emergent Bilingual Readers Through the Lens of Possibility, won the National Council of Teachers Language Art Distinction Award in 2018. So that's the article that I use one of my TESOL courses. So I'm a fan of Dr. Moreno. In addition, she has a book that is coming out that she co-authored with her colleague Cecilia Espinoza, titled Rooted in Strength, Using Translanguage to Grow Multilingual Readers and Writers, published by Scholastic. I actually got that book, but since I'm in New York, I won't be able to read until I get back to New York. So we are so excited to have Dr. Asensi Moreno here today. So now without further ado, I want to welcome Dr. Asensi Moreno. So Dr. Moreno, the floor is yours.
Great.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, so now you can share yours.
Share mine.
Yes.
Welcome, everybody. I am so honored to be at this NYS TESOL event. And I want to thank everyone for coming. I know with our Zoom lives, everybody has so many things on their agenda and competing needs. So it's particularly meaningful for me that you chose to join us today. And today the topic is language ideologies and practices in classroom reading assessments. And I'm going to tell you, I like to start off with stories. And this picture is of a running record kit in Spanish, one that's commonly used in New York City, where I was a teacher, and I've worked my whole professional life now as a teacher, educator, and researcher. And I believe this picture is significant because there's symbolism here, which speaks to the relationship between teachers and assessment. While extremely important, I always see these kits come out at certain prescribed times during the year. Otherwise, they're usually stored in closets or under tables like this picture here. And I think about that because I come to this work not as a specialist in assessment. So when I did my doctorate, I didn't say, oh, I want to study assessment. What I did was rather, as a teacher, my work was so shaped by assessment policies and practices that I could not ignore how, as someone who loved teaching reading, how assessment affected my understanding of reading and how I viewed readers. So as a dual language bilingual teacher, I was always asked to conduct running records assessment in English and Spanish 3 times a year. That means that means an enormous amount of work. And to hand in, after all that work, students' independent reading levels to the administration. When I later became a literacy coach at the same school, which was an entirely dual language bilingual school, one of my jobs was to support teachers to complete assessments and then hand in that work. So in both of these roles, I realized that really assessment was shaping the work that teachers did and shaping their understanding of assessment as well. And I'm telling you this story because my entry point and the entry point of many educators to assessment speaks to the ways that assessment shapes teachers' work and how we view emergent bilinguals. And I believe that teachers need to really think about the assessment process, how teachers are brought into that process as either agents or not as agents, and how that process attends to emergent bilinguals, because all of these questions are intimately related to equity. So as a teacher, some of the questions that emerged from my practice is, how do we accurately assess emergent bilinguals? From all of this work, and it was tremendous amount of work that took hours and hours as a teacher and hours as a literacy coach. And I was wondering if those reading levels were really the reading levels of the students, and how are we using them in a bilingual program? If we have a reading level in English and a reading level in another language such as Spanish, how do we then understand those 2 levels in tandem? And then when we conduct those assessments, how do we draw upon students' bilingual resources in reading? The informal message that I was getting from administration or even from the kids was that if a child is reading in English, that their responses also should be in English. And there was very little guidance to understand, you know, if a student tried to respond in another language, what we were supposed to do. And that gets to questions of, how is the teacher's role positioned within assessment? Are teachers following procedures in a fidel way, or to fidelity, faithfully following them? Are we supposed to be compliant with regards to classroom assessment? Or are teachers agents in ensuring that assessments meet the needs of students? So all of these questions, which I think about in 2 levels, one is, how do we actually use the assessment? And then what is the role of the teacher in classroom assessment, are all critical, not only for education professors and scholars to be discussing and exploring, but for teachers and school leaders to be actively talking about on a day-to-day basis. So just to give you a roadmap, I should say that I always plan too much. So I've planned a lot to talk a lot about my work, since I've been working on this for some time now. And what I'll try to do is go through it relatively quickly, because I would love to have a conversation with the audience members here. So first, I would like to discuss some of the issues with regards to formative assessment. We're not going to talk about standard assessment, since I'm coming from the angle of a teacher that uses formative assessment. Then how is assessment related to reading? And then I'm going to discuss briefly 2 papers, a 2018 paper in Language Arts Journal about responsive adaptations, and then a new paper that I wrote with Dr. Kate Seltzer that's coming out in the Journal of Literacy Research, either at the end of the year or the beginning of 2022, which is about language ideologies. And I'll tell you why I put those 2 together, and then a little bit about implications. So I really love running records. And if for people who don't know, running records are a way of assessing students' reading in what is attempted to be an authentic way. And here is one of my lovely students from Brooklyn College doing a running record. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why they were founded, or what's the motivation for them, and a little bit about the actual instrument. So Marie Clay, who is a researcher and educator in New Zealand, was extremely influential in observation and recording of children's behavior, because she thought that's the way we learn about them. And there's a whole literature that she did on reading recovery, which I won't get into, but she wrote this, which I really love. There must be times when the teacher stops teaching and becomes an observer, a time when she must drop all her presuppositions about what this child is like, and when she listens very carefully and records very precisely what the child can in fact do. So I love this because what Clay is really advocating is that teachers are researchers and anthropologists and come to the child, to really discover and understand what reading means for that child. So what a running record does stems from this motivation, is to listen to a child read an authentic text. So a child is reading a text. Now that they can be done informally, so you can get any book and read with a kid, but there are also kits, and those are like the kits that I showed you under the table, where there's level texts. And I'm not in my office and I haven't been in a long time, otherwise I would show you an example. There are level texts where the teacher will approach a child and say, this book is about tortillas. What do you know about
The
tortillas?
sooner you act, the sooner you're going to see all those amazing results. And if you don't, we'll give you your money back.
Okay. I'm gonna stop for a second. I couldn't. So there's a level text. The teacher asks them about their prior knowledge about the level text. Then the child reads. As you can see here, my student is taking notes on how they're reading. So if they're, how they read matches the text, which is what is called either accuracy or miscues, then analyzes those miscues, and then asks comprehension questions. I know this was a super fast overview of running records. I'm assuming that most people have an understanding of what they are. Then once you do that, you can gather an enormous amount of information from how a child reads, because not only are you taking notes, but you can also observe them. Are they feeling very confident with the book? How do they hold the book? Does a child read with the book far away from them and not touch it? There's so much information that a teacher can gather about the child's affective life towards reading, but also how they read. So whether a child said the when there was no the there, etc. So formative assessment holds enormous promise for teachers, because you can learn so much about a child by observing them and by thinking very deeply about how their reading performance. And there's a lot of organizations, and I just picked this one, the Formative Assessment for Students and Teachers Collaborative. And they also say the same thing. It's a process, and that happens during instruction, and it can provide feedback and adjust ongoing teaching. And I think that's where the promise lies, is that once teachers see how a student is performing or lives out a particular thing like reading, they can really adjust their teaching. And Davidson and Lung now a while ago also said that this promise is especially important for emerging bilingual students, because with formative assessments, teachers can see emergent bilingual students away from perhaps the lenses that other assessments have on emergent bilingual students. I want to highlight NCTE. NCTE is the National Councils of Teachers of English, and they put out a position statement on formative assessment. And what I love about their position statement is that it's focused on equity and agency. And so it doesn't just define formative assessments as a process and shaping instruction, but they also think of it as a social process, not just a technical activity. And I think that distinction is important. And they also acknowledge that assessment is not, as they said, a technical activity, but really at the center of many contexts, political, cultural, etc. And I'm just going to read, literacy assessment practice is embrace several kinds of diversity, including diversity in language, in learning styles, and in rates and routes of learning. And I think this is crucial because sometimes we think of an assessment as a one-size-fits-all type of activity, that, you know, here's the test and everybody has to take the same test. Well, I think NCTE, which I should say is comprised of educators, scholars who come together and discuss these issues, are really saying, yes, assessment is those things that we think about, but it is also a social process and also must be open to diversity. So now that we know and we think about the promise of literacy assessment, I want to quickly go into what are some general issues with literacy assessment for everyone. So this is from a long time ago, my dissertation. I studied teachers and coaches doing literacy assessments in dual language bilingual classrooms. And just like I told you at the very beginning about my experience where I would spend enormous amount of hours over the course of the year assessing my students, and in the end, hand in a sheet of paper to the administrator with the levels, that happens all over. And I think that happens all over, not only for bilingual students, but for all children. So teachers are engaged in what I call routinized assessment practice. So what I mean by that is it falls into a routine in which we're not really doing what Marie Clay said, which is become an anthropologist and see your child and understand that child and inform your understanding of reading. What we're doing is going through the motions. I need to complete 10 running records today and hand in the paper by Friday. And so in a way that routinization turns the formative assessment practice into a standardized assessment practice where we're just really looking for a score and we're not looking at all those rich behaviors that a student can demonstrate. Then, because of the routinized nature of assessment, compliance is valued over a process where you analyze the assessment. So it took hours to collect all the data, but it would also demand hours of analysis if teachers were to analyze the students' data. And that would mean that school leaders would have to provide time and hours for teachers to really dig into that data. And then the last thing is, in general, for all students, literacy assessment, because it's so focused, I think, on the miscues, which are the deviations from speaking from the text, on monomodal performances of reading. So if it says dish, but I say dip, we focus on that, but we don't focus on what are the kids doing with their bodies? How are they using the visual images? How are they bringing in their other resources during reading? And I think Serafini, Moses, and Kotorsky and Rylak really, in a recent paper in the Reading Teacher, really talk about how formative assessment becomes only focused on words, reading assessment only, rather than multimodal performances of reading. Now, specifically, so those are general assessment issues with literacy, classroom-based literacy assessment from my view. So, but they're on top of those general issues, there are further issues for the assessment of emergent bilinguals. And the primary issue is formative reading assessment is a monolingual, oh, I'm so sorry, it's been a monolingual endeavor across all program types. So regardless if you're in a TESOL program or bilingual program, if we're assessing a student in reading, it's really been in a monolingual way. And I'm going to highlight some researchers here. There's been now decades of research on the issues with formative assessment in emergent bilinguals. So Abedi in California has often written that language and content are often confounded in assessment. And there's this really clear example where, there's a math assessment with a spinner, and the spinner is divided into different sections, and there are numbers in each section. And the question is English, which one is the spinner most likely to land on? And the triangles are different sizes. So the idea that which one, when there's actually a one in the spinner, maybe I should have put a picture of this, is very clear that we're not testing math per se, but we're testing the student's understanding of that question, which can be very complex for an emergent bilingual if you're using the word one in a non-mathematical way to answer a mathematical question. Shohami has written about how formative assessments are used to evaluate monolingual students along, multilingual students along monoglossic standards, and it ignores their multilingualism. And Yoon talks about literacy assessments as they function as regulatory tools. And I think that's related to my earlier point about compliance, is that we're not really learning about the students as readers, we're grading them as readers. And we need to then, one way we need to work from understanding these problems is to think about how do we shift our assessment frameworks. And Shisel, Jamie, who's here in her 2020 chapter, which is so amazing, wrote approaches to testing that incorporate deficit-based monolingual perspective are set up to be inadequate in creating more equitable testing approaches because they continue to operate within monolingual ideological frameworks that are incongruent with the semiotic and linguistic practice of language minoritized bilinguals. So what we need to do is really to shift our understanding of, it's not just tweaking a given test, but it's really shifting the assessment framework to fit our newer, more robust understandings of bilingualism. So with that, if we are assessing children's reading, then we need to really ask ourselves, how does reading exist within schools and within assessment? We can't just change our assessments without understanding what is it that we understand reading to be, and what is it that we understand reading to be for emergent bilinguals. So I think in schools, we really need to ask, what is reading and how is it connected to teachers' language, to students' language practices? And I say this because schools often don't think about this, but rather their definition of reading is dictated by a test. So this, in New York State, we have our ELA test from 3rd grade on, and what teachers understand reading to be is based on that test, because that's how they are assessed as well. And that definition of reading is not connected to students' language practices. And then to think about also the curriculum that teachers use. How do we teach reading in schools? And how does that frame teachers' understanding of what reading is? And then how does our reading practice match up for our vision of the teaching of reading? So we may hold visions or ideas of what teaching reading is, but then our practice may not match that. I'm going to skip that. I have a couple more questions. So in general, teachers' understanding of reading instruction is critical to assessment. If we believe that reading in English means answering all the questions and thinking about reading only in English, that means that our assessment, if a student responds in English, we're going to say, well, they can't read, because that's our conceptualization. So we need to think about, how do we amplify our understanding of emergent bilinguals as readers? And how does that match up to what we know about how their reading develops? And then, I'm sorry, there's so many questions. And then how do we use this knowledge to understand and formatively assess emergent bilinguals' reading and reading development? So I've done some thinking about it, and I've thought about my own experience as a teacher, elementary school teacher who teaches reading. And when I started teaching in the 90s, I held a monolingual view of reading, and it was upheld by all of the information and professional development that I was getting, which was students develop reading skills in one language and then transfer them to another native language. So I'm teaching reading in English, and what I teach them in English will transfer seamlessly to Spanish and vice versa. And there were really very few ways that that narrative was interrupted for me. It wasn't until I got to graduate school and I started really thinking about reading that I have developed, and not by myself, obviously, but a more complex and multidimensional idea of reading that's based or centered on students' multilingualism. And I love this article in Reading Research Quarterly by Compton, Lilly, Mitra, Guay, and Spence that was published last year, where they really think about reading as a complex multidimensional process that includes language, social participation, cultural membership, and identity negotiation. So reading isn't just the language that you speak. We can't just make it a unidimensional process. It really involves language, but also your social history, your culture, and your identity. And in the recent book that I wrote with Cecilia Espinosa, we really talk about reading as a meaning-making process that's centered on the person. So it's not as external as it is internal. And with Kate Seltzer, we really thought about who is considered a reader is in part shaped by a conceptualization of reading and readers over what racialized emergent bilinguals already can or have the potential to do. And I want to connect this back to one of the originals, Marie Clay, who I think was really, that this is in line with what Marie Clay originally wanted early in the 90s, is that who we consider, we should come with a clean slate when we think about readers rather than already characterizing them. Okay. I know that I have a lot of research here, but there's been some really promising work in this area, particularly Briceño and Klein, their reading teacher article in 2018 about language-related miscues in Spanish is really illuminating. Even they don't talk about translanguaging as much, but they really talk about the influence of different languages on reading. And I think that's a super helpful article for teachers. Bauer, Eurydice Bauer, in 2018 also wrote an article, and I love this one as well, about how Latinx and African-American students in a dual language bilingual program translanguage as they narrate, using linguistic and semiotic features. And they really paid attention to the semiotic features that students used, or like their body and their comments. And I think that gets to the Serafini article, that reading isn't only about language, but it's also transcends language and is multimodal. And then Cabuto, my favorite, Bobby Cabuto in 2017 wrote a beautiful article about culturally relevant assessment. And she looked at running records and thought about how we need to think about running records as culturally relevant assessments that don't favor monolingual English reading competence over other reading competencies. And I think the collective voice of all these articles is that we need to really push back against this idea that reading is a monolingual endeavor. And we need to think of it in an amplified way where it's multilingual and multimodal. And how can we learn about readers once we embrace this definition of reading? So I'm going to go into discussing my 2018 article. And again, I'm going to just do really kind of a brief overview so you get a sense of that article before going into my my reading the language ideologies paper. So I was motivated to do this research because I realized that when teachers limit their emergent bilinguals reading performance to one language, they're not able to detect and respond to the full span of students' reading abilities. We need to really understand what reading means as an internal process that includes English, Spanish, etc., other languages. So if we don't do that, then we really have an impartial and inaccurate assessment of emergent bilinguals. So I'm going to tell you about this research by introducing one of the teachers in the research. Her name, and this is a pseudonym, is Ella. She's an English as a new language teacher. And that's the term we use for TESOL in New York State. She had 15 plus years of experience, and she also spoke some Spanish. While she was not completely fluent, she could speak some Spanish and used it very kind of intentionally with her students. All of her students in this, and this is not in New York City, actually, it's outside of New York City in a suburb. She used her Spanish, all of her students in her ENL class were Spanish speakers. And she came to an understanding that she said to me once in a memo, and I really think this is critical. A one-size-fits-all practice for assessing reading does not create a level playing field for emergent bilingual students. In her class, she had Santiago, also a pseudonym, who was at that time a fifth grader. He was from, or is from Guatemala. He had been in the US for 3 years, and it was his second year at that school, Willow. So this is a picture of a running record. This particular running record is a DRA, Developmental Reading Assessment. And what we did here was we were focused on pronunciation. So I'm just gonna highlight the things in red. One day when the little boy was going to take his bath, he saw a baby bird on the ground. It had fallen out of the nest. The boy put the bird back in the nest. So you can see a little more clearly what a miscue is. So if you hear the word differently from what it says in the text, you write it above the word. So we went back and we said to Santiago, "Beard, can you show me what that means or tell me what it means?" And he pointed to the bird in the picture. And then we were like, oh, in Spanish, I sounds like E. So beard would make sense that that's a Spanish pronunciation of the word bird. But in English, since beard also has a meaning, the teacher heard it as beard and not as bird. So we would flag that as a pronunciation issue and not count it as a miscue. And so the brief story here is to be curious about the miscues and understand how they may stem from the particularities of language learners. And Phelan as well. Fallen, he understood what it meant. And those are just two small pronunciation examples. Then there's Yadida, also pseudonym, who was also a fifth grader, and she had just recently arrived to this school, also from Guatemala, and she had interrupted schooling as a fifth grader. And this wasn't a running record from a kid, but Ella wanted to see how she read this book, In the Rain. And I think this is one of those Rigby, which is a publisher, ESL books. Before Ella read this book with Yadida, she decided to print out a map and show her New York and Vietnam, and she colored in Vietnam. She also decided to highlight these words because she thought that maybe Yadida would need to know those. And as you can see, this book is at a lower elementary grade level that would be typically thought of. And what Ella did was, since this didn't come from a kit, she typed it out and did the running record this way. And I just wanted to show you that Yadida, I didn't do an analysis of this, but Yadida she doesn't have very many miscues. And the miscues, for example, Ha's family, came, she said come, are not ones that interfere with meaning making. Here are my new boots. So she inserted the word new, which would make sense because they're talking about buying boots in the class. But what I really want to focus on in the book, what I really want to focus on here is how she assessed her comprehension. So Yadida is new to the school, new to English, and So she decided instead of asking her oral questions, she would ask her to write. And she featured the questions both in English and Spanish. And as I said, she could do that because she spoke Spanish, and the other ESL teacher also was a fluent Spanish speaker, so she could have consulted with her. What was the problem in the story? What did the characters do to solve the problem? And how did the story end? So she could then have Yadida write, and she could see her comprehension. So I'm not going to discuss very deeply Yadida's responses, but we can see some of possibly the effects of interrupted schooling. El problema fue que está lloviendo spelled with a Y instead of double L. And we can see that we can analyze her writing in Spanish if you understand Spanish. If not, Spanish is a common language. It's easy to ask, hopefully, other members of the community to provide their feedback on this as well. But what I love about Ella's response is that she responds in Spanish as an ENL teacher, but she responds on two levels. First, she responds to the child's reading, and then she responds to the child's language. So she said, you know that you corrected yourself, you know that you corrected yourself as you read. So there's a reading level response, talking about self-corrections. Then, now we're going to talk about some of the words that were difficult, and we're going to work on some words. So she's teasing out working on language versus working on reading. And I think that that's really important, and a shift from a teacher listening to a kid and just working on the language and not working on reading, and showing kids that, that I'm not just going to listen to your English proficiency while I assess your reading. I'm also going to listen to you as a reader. So what I wrote here is Ella affirmed Yadida's use of self-corrections, which I think at an early grade is considered really an important reading skill, because it means that the child is really attending to their reading. And she identified English vocabulary for Yadida to pay attention to, and in speaking in Spanish, her reading performance, even though it's in English, can be processed in any language. So from this work, and in that 2018 paper, if you're interested, I discuss a concept called responsive adaptations. And what I mean by that is that the formative reading assessment can be adapted, and there can be room for students' language practices through opportunities of translanguaging. And I put this picture because, we see adaptations throughout, nature. It seems an important thing to do also within education. And it's important to say that this is not also just another routine. They are flexible knowledge ways based of responding to students. The idea that students hold strength and that we can understand their strengths by adapting assessment. And like I said, they're not a new set of procedures or uninformed or unconnected to students' learning. It's not, I want to make a really important point. It's not willy-nilly, I'll do whatever I want. It's let me figure out how I can understand the heart of how this student reads. And this is a chart with different types of responsive adaptations, comparing them to what is generally done at different times during our reading assessment. Again, because of time, I'm not going to go over it, but I just wanted to highlight that. I know I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm just going to go into the last part of the presentation. After writing this article and having it out in the world, I realized very quickly that there was more work to do. Ella, the same teacher that I had featured, gave a presentation to her faculty, to her peers at the school, and it was received horribly. teachers were vocally opposed to making, this is what she wrote to me in an email. Some teachers were vocally opposed to making adaptations because they thought that this made the assessment invalid and meaningless. I explained that it's a test designed for monolingual students, and if we don't make some of the adaptations and be flexible in our thinking, we're penalizing these students and not recognizing the skills they do not have. But yet, I would say from her stories to me, the majority of the teachers thought that this was giving an unfair advantage to emergent bilinguals and was absolutely ridiculous, to say it in an informal way. And so then I went to my dear friend and colleague, Kate Seltzer, who really has worked on a critical translingual approach, and asked her if she could help me analyze data to really think about not only how we shift assessment practices, but how we shift ideologies of teachers, because we realize that you can't just tweak an instrument, you also have to shift the way people think about instruments. So we really started with this question is, how do the obscured language ideologies embedded within assessment shape the literacy assessment of emergent bilinguals? And I'm just going to highlight some of the quotes. So I'm not going to discuss it in detail because again, there's not enough time. But again, what we decided is we need a multi-pronged effort where we really look at the practical tools used in the classroom, but we also interrogate the ideologies that shape them and how they shape our work. So this is, I'll tell you very quickly. So we used a larger data set, and there were teachers in a dual language program that is a French program in an upper middle class neighborhood in New York City. So that's very different from the positioning of the ENL teacher who was teaching, again, English as a new language teacher who was teaching immigrant students with interrupted schooling who were from low-income families. So we did a contrastive analysis between those teachers' discourses. So, but both teachers from very different populations of schools said the same thing, that top-down assessment policies ignore the multilingualism of students. So they're getting messages from everywhere that English reading is much more important than reading in any other language. So Maureen, who's a 5th grade dual language teacher in a French program, wrote, "The English reading levels are used. Students are held to standards-based report cards, so their reading level in English makes or breaks their grade." So regardless if you're an upper middle class French-speaking student in Manhattan or Brooklyn or whatever, or you are a recent immigrant who has a lower income, it doesn't matter. The system basically is saying to all teachers and all students, English reading really matters. But what we also found is that the perceptions of readers really differed in the two contexts. And this is going to be my last point, Ching Ching, so that we have some time. I'm going to read probably 2 more quotes. Audrey, who is also a French dual language teacher, said, "When they get to 5th grade and they're reading French at a really high level and the teacher says retell and the kids retell in English, to me it's a bad habit and I want to break it. I say, read the book a couple of times to get one new word that you can think you can use in your retell. I don't want them to get to really high reading level and not be able to tell in French." So you can see here 2 things. One is that confounding of reading with language. So, you know, if you read the book, you've got to speak about it in that language. That's one thing. So the assessment as a site of language instruction rather than the assessment of reading. And then the other thing is here, what Kate Seltzer and I say is that she's really explaining away kids' inability to retell in French in a way that it's a bad habit. It doesn't say anything about their families. It doesn't say anything about their potential. It just is a bad habit, and they should break it. And we can see here that Vanessa, who's an ENL teacher, has a very different take on students as readers. And her students are the immigrant students who have interrupted schooling and come from lower income family. If you're not a good reader, you're going to struggle with everything else. So we concentrate on reading, because if they learn to love to read, they'll become good writers. I think it's something that they lack, because when they go home, they don't have that. So I always feel my biggest goal every year is to make sure that they become good readers. And in studying this discourse, we realized when teachers were talking about low income students who are racialized, often their reading was also associated with their family life, their cultural life. Oh, they don't have anything at home. It's not explained away, but it's a bad habit that we have to break it. It's, these kids are lost. They're going to be struggling forever. I'm going to skip this, but really, Ella really was somebody who had an alternative. She really thought that through assessing students in a different way, that teachers could cultivate a deeper understanding of students. And I'm just going to put this up because I know that we have only 8 minutes, and I do want to leave time for people to, to speak, and I want to see your questions. So thank you so much for listening. I know it was a lot and I spoke really quickly, but please let me know if you have questions.
Thank you, Dr. Moreno, for your powerful presentation. Indeed, if we reframe assessment as understanding multilingual students, multilingual and multimodal and complex literacy practices, then we have to invite the student as a co-investigator of their own literacy practices. And that means that we also have to enact their agency in their learning. I know that if you're like me, you will have a lot of burning questions for Dr. Moreno. So right now I'm going to open the floor for you. And since it's difficult to see who is raising your hand when you have such a huge crowd, so I'm just going to ask you, and if you have any question to ask, just turn on your microphone and just ask. Anyone?
I also have questions that were sent to me. So,
okay.
But if anyone has questions, you can chat them, you can speak them.
I have a question. I've heard a lot of these types of things from colleagues about, how, it can be together. I mean, on the Regents exam, it was, no, either they're going to write in their language or they're going to write in English. And I said, well, whoever that works for the state that's going to translate this exam is going to understand however it comes out, if it comes out in those two. And they just look at me like they can't really understand what I'm saying, or maybe it's just new and they're processing it. But I'm just wondering if is it like the why of it? Do you think it's that people think that languages are separate, or what is your theory about that?
That's a great question. I think that for so many years, like I said earlier in the presentation, in the 1990s, that's how I learned in teacher ed school. Like, oh, the kids will transfer from one language to the next. And also the informal messages that I received. I remember when I was a teenager and I went to go visit my cousins in Colombia, they were like, speak Colombian Spanish and speak it well. It was like this idea. And I think Nelson Florence writes about this, about governmentality, and that language has been used to regulate people. That's not my, what I do. I'm really focused on classroom literacy practices, but what you're asking is the origin of that, I think comes from the function of language to regulate people. It's also easier. So I think, you know, language is so related to identity. And so, you know, if you, you know, I think if you read something in English, it's easier. The way that we're advocating for assessments to be used is definitely much more difficult than if you do everything in English, for example. Or, you know, the simpler an assessment is, the easier it is to grade it. It takes less time, it takes less skill. And I think what we're asking for is something that requires enormous skill. And it's hard to kind of scale that up. But Marjorie, I hope I answered the question. But I think, yeah, I think it comes from a lot of different places. I think how language is conceived in society is one, that's a huge question, but then also the messages that teachers get about language, you know, and the kind of the messages that we know about language learning. You know, I always hear things like, well, why use home languages if, you know, my grandparents came from X country and they learned English. And so this idea, kind of these lay ideas that people learn the hard way, like we did it the hard way. We only learned this and we adapted. So all of these kind of narratives coming together in the end within assessment, I think people are like, what do you mean? They just have to do it all in English or they have to do it all in Spanish. So it does take a lot of, I think, work to change those ideas.
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah. So I know this probably is just a little bit off topic. You talk about the assessment. Yes, if we consider bilingualism, you know, we can assess the kids more realistically, more, you know, close to a case level. Instead of just using English as the assessment tool language. So I was wondering, I'm not in a bilingual education, but I'm a language educator. I was wondering too, will you implement this dual language education? Will it, does it slow down the progress of language, I mean, English language learner? Like, because you use his own or her own language, native language, instead of like a pure language. In a language classroom, you want to speak as much as possible the target language to push the comprehension, to push the progress. So I was just wondering, in a bilingual classroom, how that will affect a child's progress in English.
I think it's really important to understand that you have intentionality. So it's, again, it's not like willy-nilly you do whatever you want. If you're in a dual language bilingual program, you still have programmatic goals that are linked to proficiency, but you're more open to how those are achieved. So the idea is that maybe if you gave kids like an assignment, like write a descriptive report on one of these animals from the Arctic, that if you didn't allow kids to translanguage or use their home language or all their language resources, that they may be able to only produce a very superficial product. But if they are, they're allowed to use all their language practices and you guide them towards proficiency, like saying, okay, you wrote this part about food, of penguins, food in Spanish. Now let's think about how we get to it in English, that you're going to get a richer product. So it's really a different way of thinking about the route to language, to learning a language, rather than just a one way. You do it in a monolingual way. I hope that was helpful. I know that's already 5 o'clock, and I'm so sorry that I spoke for so long. And I know there were a lot of questions that Professor TESOL wrote. And I think one of them that I want to answer is that one student wrote, how can we support translanguaging practices where some students face discrimination due to their home languages and therefore feel hesitant? And I saw this a lot at the beginning of, like in 2016. I think again, I'm going to plug Kate Salter's work on metacognition and having kids, and Angie Zapata's work on kids really thinking about their translingual practices and their translanguaging practices is really important, so that they're not only learning language, but they're learning to think and discuss about their language practices. So with that, thank you so much, everyone. It was really wonderful to have you all here. I'm going to look at the chat. Ching Ching, it's 5:01 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Dr. Moreno, for sharing your experience and expertise with us. No doubt that this will be an ongoing discussion, and in this community, constructive conversation is always welcome. And with this, due to the constraint of time, we will be concluding today's webinar program. Again, today's presentation is titled Language Ideology and Practice in Classroom Reading Assessment with Dr. Laura Moreno. Again, thank you for spending your time with us. Please take care and stay safe. And I look forward to seeing you at future NYS TESOL webinars.
Thank you,
Take care,
everybody.
everyone.